Welcome to Crime Line. I'm David. Tonight, we're diving into one of America's most enduring and debated unsolved mysteries, the disappearance of a man who was once one of the most powerful figures in the nation, Jimmy Hoffa, the former president of the formidable Teamsters Union. Hoffa was a man of immense influence, a champion to his members, and a deeply controversial figure with undeniable ties to organized crime. On a summer afternoon in 1975, Jimmy Hoffa drove to a suburban Detroit restaurant for a meeting with alleged Mafia kingpins. He was seen waiting, making phone calls, and then he vanished. No ransom note, no credible witnesses to an abduction, just an empty car and a mystery that has baffled investigators and captivated the public for nearly half a century. What happened to Jimmy Hoffa? Was he silenced by the very forces he once associated with? Join us on Crime Line as we unpack the life and times of Jimmy Hoffa, the circumstances leading up to that fateful day, the prime suspects, and the countless theories that have attempted to explain his disappearance. This is a story of power, corruption, and a man who became a legend, even in death. James Riddle. Jimmy Hoffa was one of the most formidable and polarizing figures in 20th century American labor history. Primarily known for his iron-fisted leadership of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, IBT, one of the largest and most powerful labor unions in the United States. Hoffa's rise within the Teamsters was meteoric, beginning as a young warehouse worker and organizer in Detroit during the Great Depression. His aggressive tactics, fearless determination, and charismatic appeal to rank-and-file members propelled him through the union hierarchy. By 1957, he had ascended to the presidency of the Teamsters, a position he would hold until his imprisonment in 1967. Under Hoffa's leadership, the Teamsters Union reached the zenith of its power and influence. He successfully consolidated various local and regional trucking agreements into the National Master Freight Agreement in 1964. A landmark achievement that standardized wages, benefits, and working conditions for hundreds of thousands of truck drivers across the country. This brought unprecedented prosperity and job security to Teamsters members, earning him their fierce loyalty. He was seen by many as a champion of the working class, a tough negotiator who delivered tangible results. The union's control over the nation's transportation network gave it immense economic leverage, making Hoffa a significant political force. However, Hoffa's tenure was also deeply mired in controversy and allegations of corruption. His name became inextricably linked with organized crime, with numerous accusations that he had allowed Mafia figures to infiltrate the union, misuse its vast pension funds for illicit loans and investments, and engage in racketeering. These connections led to intense scrutiny from federal authorities, most notably Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, who made prosecuting Hoffa a personal crusade. Hoffa faced multiple indictments and trials, eventually being convicted for jury tampering, mail fraud, and conspiracy. His leadership style, while effective in building union power, was often described as autocratic and ruthless, further fueling the controversies that surrounded him. This blend of genuine achievement for his members and deep-seated corruption made Jimmy Hoffa a complex, controversial, and ultimately tragic figure whose influence and notoriety extended far beyond the labor movement. Jimmy Hoffa's legacy is profoundly dualistic, painting him as both a celebrated champion of the American working class and a notorious figure deeply entangled with organized crime. This duality is central to understanding his impact and the controversies that ultimately defined his career and mysterious disappearance. On one hand, Hoffa was undeniably successful in significantly improving the lives of Teamsters members. His crowning achievement was the 1964 National Master Freight Agreement, which consolidated numerous local and regional contracts into a single national pact. This landmark agreement brought standardized and substantially improved wages, robust pension plans, health benefits, and better working conditions to hundreds of thousands of truck drivers and warehousemen across the United States. He was a fierce negotiator, and his efforts fostered immense loyalty among the rank and file, who saw him as a leader who delivered tangible economic gains and fought tirelessly for their interests. Conversely, Hoffa's name became synonymous with corruption and mafia influence within the labor movement. Throughout his ascent and presidency, persistent allegations and eventual convictions highlighted his close ties to organized crime figures. It was widely believed, and later substantiated in various investigations, that Hoffa utilized mafia connections to consolidate his power, intimidate rivals, and that he, in turn, allowed mob elements to gain access to and exploit the Teamsters' considerable assets, particularly its lucrative pension funds. These funds were allegedly used for questionable loans to finance mafia-backed ventures, such as Las Vegas casinos. His battles with federal authorities, notably Robert F. Kennedy, who as Attorney General aggressively pursued him, brought these illicit connections into sharp public focus, leading to Hoffa's convictions for jury tampering, mail fraud, and conspiracy. This paradoxical image, a labor hero who walked with mobsters, creates a complex historical figure. He was seen by his supporters as a pragmatic leader who did what was necessary, including dealing with unsavory elements, to uplift the working man in a tough, often violent era for labor organizing. To his detractors and law enforcement, he was a corrupt official who betrayed his members' trust by allowing criminal enterprises to siphon union resources and exert undue influence. This contradictory reputation, as both a benefactor to laborers and a friend to criminals, cemented his legendary status and continues to fuel debate about his true character and the ultimate price of his power. July 30th, 1975 is a date indelibly etched into the annals of American crime history, marking the day former Teamsters president Jimmy Hoffa vanished without a trace. This was not the disappearance of an ordinary citizen. Hoffa was a figure of immense national recognition, a man who had once wielded enormous power and who remained a subject of intense public fascination and controversy. Even after his fall from grace and imprisonment, his sudden disappearance immediately ignited a firestorm of media attention and public speculation, quickly escalating into one of the most perplexing and enduring mysteries the United States has ever known. At the time of his disappearance, Hoffa was in a transitional phase of his life. He had been released from federal prison in 1971 after serving part of a 13-year sentence for jury tampering and mail fraud. His sentence, commuted by President Richard Nixon. A condition of his commutation barred him from any union activities until 1980. However, Hoffa, never one to be sidelined, was reportedly chafing under these restrictions and actively, albeit covertly, maneuvering to reclaim his power base within the Teamsters. This ambition to return to the union leadership, which he felt was rightfully his, placed him in direct conflict with elements of organized crime that had become further entrenched in the Teamsters during his absence and were comfortable with the new, more pliable leadership. The fact that a man of Hoffa's stature, a former union titan with a notoriously tough reputation and deep connections to both legitimate power brokers and the underworld, could simply vanish in broad daylight from a suburban restaurant parking lot was profoundly shocking. There were no ransom demands, no credible immediate claims of responsibility, just a void where a larger-than-life personality had been. This absence of immediate answers fueled rampant speculation. Was it a mafia hit, a political assassination? Did he stage his own disappearance? The questions were numerous, and the answers non-existent. July 30th, 1975, therefore, represents not just the day a man went missing, but the beginning of a decades-long enigma that has captivated investigators, journalists, authors, and the public, symbolizing the often brutal intersection of power, ambition, labor, and organized crime in post-war America. The Match's Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township, an affluent suburb of Detroit, Michigan, has become an iconic, almost legendary, location in American true crime lore. It was here, in its seemingly innocuous parking lot, that Jimmy Hoffa was last seen on the afternoon of July 30th, 1975. The restaurant itself was an upscale establishment, known for its fine dining and popular among the local elite, making it a starkly ordinary backdrop for such a sinister and high-profile disappearance. Hoffa himself was familiar with the restaurant, It had even been the site of his son James P. Hoffa's wedding reception, adding a layer of tragic irony to its role in his vanishing. On that day, Hoffa had driven to the Maciu's Red Fox for a supposed 2 Sunroad P2M, meeting with 2 powerful Mafia figures, Anthony Tony Provenzano, a Teamsters official and Genovese crime family capo from New Jersey, and Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone, a leading figure in the Detroit Mafia. The purpose of the meeting, as Hoffa understood it, was likely to discuss his ambitions to regain the presidency of the Teamsters Union and to seek their support, or at least their non-interference. The choice of a public, well-regarded restaurant might have been intended to lend an air of legitimacy or normalcy to what was, in reality, a high-stakes organized crime sit-down. According to reports and witness accounts, Hoffa arrived at the restaurant around 200 p.m. When his expected contacts failed to appear on time, he grew impatient. Around 2:15 p.m. or 2:30 p.m., he reportedly made at least 2 phone calls from a payphone near the restaurant. One was to his wife, Josephine, complaining that he had been stood up and that he would wait a little longer before heading home. The other was reportedly to his close associate, Louis Linteau. After these calls, he was seen waiting in or near his car in the parking lot. This period of waiting, and his visible presence there, were the last confirmed sightings of Jimmy Hoffa. The Maciu's Red Fox restaurant and its parking lot immediately became the focal point of the initial investigation. Hoffa's unlocked green Pontiac Grandville was found there the next morning. FBI agents swarmed the location, conducting forensic examinations of the car and the surrounding area, and even setting up a temporary command post in one of the restaurant's banquet rooms. Despite these efforts, no definitive clues as to Hoffa's fate were found at the site itself. The restaurant, however, was forever linked to the mystery, a tangible landmark in an otherwise intangible disappearance, drawing curious onlookers and media attention for years to come. It ceased operations as the Maciu's Red Fox in 1996, with another restaurant later taking over the premises. But its place in the Hoffa saga remains undiminished. The intended meeting at the Maciu's Red Fox restaurant on July 30th, 1975, was with the 2 notorious organized crime figures, Anthony Tony Provenzano and Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone. This planned rendezvous is considered by investigators and historians to be the critical event leading directly to Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance. Both men were powerful mafiosi with significant influence, and their relationship with Hoffa was complex and, in Provenzano's case, had become deeply acrimonious. Anthony Provenzano was a formidable figure from New Jersey. He was not only a captain capo in the Genovese crime family, one of New York's 5 families, but also a high-ranking official within the Teamsters Union, specifically as president of Local 560 in Union City, New Jersey. Hoffa and Provenzano had once been allies, even serving time together in Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary in the late 1960s. However, their relationship reportedly soured dramatically while in prison, allegedly over a dispute that may have involved union matters or a personal insult. Provenzano was known for his violent temper and ruthlessness, and by 1975 he was considered a significant opponent of Hoffa's attempts to regain power within the Teamsters. His presence as one of the expected attendees was a clear indication of the dangerous territory Hoffa was navigating. Anthony Giacalone was a reputed and feared enforcer and street boss for the Detroit partnership, the Detroit Mafia. He was known as a powerful mediator and a key figure in organized crime activities in the Detroit area. Giacalone's role in the scheduled meeting was likely that of a go-between or an arbiter, possibly to help smooth over the tensions between Hoffa and Provenzano, or to represent the Detroit Mafia's interests concerning Hoffa's comeback plans. Hoffa had long-standing ties with the Detroit mob, which had initially supported his rise in the Teamsters. The supposed purpose of this high-stakes meeting was for Hoffa to clear the air with these powerful figures, particularly Provenzano, and to garner support, or at least an understanding for his efforts to reclaim the Teamsters' presidency. He needed to address any opposition from organized crime elements who were content with the current union leadership under Frank Fitzsimmons, who was seen as more compliant with Mafia interests. However, neither Provenzano nor Giacalone ever admitted to being scheduled to meet Hoffa that day, nor were they ever definitively placed at the Maciu's Red Fox at the appointed time. They both had alibis, though the credibility of those alibis has been questioned. Their failure to appear, or their denial of the meeting altogether, and Hoffa's subsequent vanishing immediately made them prime suspects in the eyes of the FBI and the public, solidifying the theory that Hoffa was lured to his death by powerful enemies within the Mafia. The last confirmed sightings of Jimmy Hoffa occurred in the parking lot of the Maciu's Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township, Michigan, during the mid-afternoon of July 30th, 1975, after arriving for his scheduled 200 p.m. meeting and finding that his expected associates, Anthony Provenzano and Anthony Giacalone, were not there. Hoffa grew increasingly agitated. He made phone calls, one to his wife, Josephine, and another to his associate, Louis Linteau, expressing his frustration at being stood up and indicating he would not wait much longer. Witnesses, including restaurant staff and patrons, reported seeing Hoffa in and around his green Pontiac Grandville in the parking lot, visibly impatient. The time frame for these last sightings is generally placed between 2:30 p.m. and 2:45 p.m. What transpired after these final observations is the central enigma of the Hoffa case. There were no credible eyewitnesses who reported seeing Hoffa being abducted, forced into another vehicle, or any signs of a struggle in the bustling restaurant parking lot during daylight hours. He simply vanished. This disappearance into thin air of such a high-profile and recognizable figure is one of the most baffling aspects of the mystery. It suggests a meticulously planned operation, executed with precision and an ability to control the environment, likely by individuals who knew how to operate without drawing attention. The perpetrators would have needed to approach Hoffa, convince or compel him to leave with them, and then transport him away from the scene, all without alerting anyone in the vicinity. When Hoffa failed to return home later that evening, his family grew concerned. His wife, Josephine, knew of his planned meeting and the individuals involved, which immediately raised alarms given their notorious reputations. By the next morning, July 31st, when Hoffa still had not appeared, he was officially reported missing to the Bloomfield Township Police. His car was quickly located in the Maciu's Red Fox parking lot, unlocked, with no obvious signs of a struggle inside or any immediate clues as to Hoffa's whereabouts or what might have befallen him. The complete lack of direct evidence from the scene itself, no reliable witnesses to an abduction, no forensic evidence indicating violence in the parking lot, plunged investigators into an immediate informational vacuum. It was as if Jimmy Hoffa had stepped out of his car and simply ceased to exist. This absence of a clear starting point for what happened after his last sighting allowed numerous theories to proliferate and underscored the professional, almost seamless, nature of his abduction and presumed murder, a hallmark of a sophisticated organized crime hit. A crucial early piece of physical evidence in the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa was his car, a green 1974 Pontiac Grandville, which was found abandoned in the parking lot of the Maciu's Red Fox restaurant on the morning of July 31st, 1975, the day after he was last seen. Hoffa had driven himself to the restaurant for the ill-fated meeting, and the discovery of his vehicle, still at the location where he was expecting to meet his associates, confirmed he had indeed arrived, but offered frustratingly few clues as to what happened next. The car was reportedly found unlocked, which could have various interpretations. Perhaps Hoffa left it unlocked, anticipating a quick return, or maybe his abductors unlocked it. There were no immediate, obvious signs of a struggle inside or around the vehicle, such as broken glass, bloodstains, or indications of a violent confrontation. This lack of visible disturbance suggested that Hoffa might have left his car willingly, or was overpowered or coerced so swiftly and professionally that no trace of a scuffle was left behind. The car keys were not in the ignition or found in the immediate vicinity. The FBI, taking lead on the investigation due to the potential involvement of organized crime and interstate implications, conducted an intensive forensic examination of the Pontiac. They dusted for fingerprints, searched for hairs, fibers, blood, or any other trace evidence that could point to Hoffa's fate or his abductors. Despite these efforts, the car yielded remarkably little of value to the investigation. While Hoffa's own fingerprints were present, as expected, no significant unidentified prints linked to known suspects were recovered. Some reports indicate that specially trained dogs were brought in to search for Hoffa's scent trail leading away from the car. But these efforts also proved inconclusive or led to dead ends. The car, therefore, while confirming Hoffa's presence at the Machu's Red Fox, quickly became another frustrating dead end in the investigation. Its presence in the parking lot, seemingly undisturbed, deepened the mystery. Was it left there as a deliberate act of misdirection by his abductors? Or was it simply the point from which Hoffa was transferred to another vehicle? Its abandonment a matter of convenience for the perpetrators. The pristine condition of the car relative to any signs of violence only reinforced the theory that Hoffa was likely ambushed by people he knew or trusted enough not to immediately resist, or that the operation was carried out with such efficiency that no struggle was possible. It stood as a silent, metallic witness that offered no testimony. The disappearance of a figure as prominent and controversial as Jimmy Hoffa triggered an immediate and massive investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation (FBI), an operation that would become one of the longest, most complex, and ultimately most frustrating in the agency's history. Codenamed Hoffex Hoffa Exhibition, the inquiry mobilized hundreds of agents across the country, particularly in Detroit, New Jersey, and New York, areas where Hoffa and his suspected Mafia adversaries held significant influence. The FBI dedicated enormous resources, including extensive surveillance, informant development, and countless man-hours, in a relentless effort to uncover what happened to Hoffa and bring his abductors to justice. The investigation focused on several key areas. Firstly, agents meticulously attempted to reconstruct Hoffa's last known movements, interviewing everyone who might have seen him on July 30th, 1975, or had knowledge of his planned meeting. Secondly, they delved deep into Hoffa's complex network of associates, both within the Teamsters Union and the murky world of organized crime. This involved questioning numerous Teamsters officials and reputed Mafia members, including Anthony Provenzano and Anthony Giacalone, the men Hoffa was supposed to meet. Thirdly, a significant portion of the FBI's efforts over the years was dedicated to the grim task of searching for Hoffa's remains, acting on tips, informant information, and speculative theories. Agents conducted numerous digs and searches at various locations, from suburban Detroit homes and farms to more remote areas, all proving fruitless. The Hoffex investigation faced monumental challenges. The most significant obstacle was the notorious Omerta, the Mafia's code of silence, which made it incredibly difficult to extract truthful information from individuals connected to organized crime. Potential witnesses were often too intimidated to cooperate, or they provided misleading information. The lack of direct physical evidence from the scene of the disappearance, no body, no murder weapon, no definitive forensic link to suspects severely hampered the case. Investigators were also inundated with false leads, publicity seekers, and conflicting accounts, further complicating their efforts. Moreover, the internal politics of the Teamsters Union and the labyrinthine nature of Mafia hierarchies added layers of complexity. Despite these hurdles, the FBI pursued the case with tenacity for decades, while the active, full-scale investigation eventually wound down as leads dried up. The Hoffa case was never officially closed. It remains a potent symbol of the limits of law enforcement in the face of well-orchestrated organized crime, and a stark reminder that even one of the most extensive investigations in FBI history could be stymied, leaving the fate of Jimmy Hoffa an enduring American mystery. The most enduring and widely accepted theory regarding Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance is that he was abducted and murdered by elements of organized crime, specifically the Mafia. This hypothesis became the central focus of the FBI's Hoffa's investigation and remains the prevailing belief among law enforcement, historians, and the public. Several compelling, albeit largely circumstantial, pieces of evidence and contextual factors support this conclusion. Firstly, Hoffa had a long and deeply intertwined history with various Mafia families. While these relationships were often mutually beneficial in his rise to power and in the expansion of the Teamsters, they also created powerful enemies, particularly when Hoffa's interests diverged from those of his erstwhile underworld allies. By 1975, Hoffa was actively campaigning to regain the presidency of the Teamsters, a move that was strongly opposed by influential Mafia figures who had grown comfortable with his more pliable successor. Frank Fitzsimmons. Under Fitzsimmons, organized crime had allegedly tightened its grip on the union's lucrative pension funds, using them for various illicit enterprises. Hoffa's return threatened this arrangement, as he was known to be a tougher, more independent leader who might curtail their access and influence. He had also reportedly made threats to expose Mafia infiltration of the Union if his comeback was blocked. Secondly, the very nature of his disappearance vanishing in broad daylight from a public place without a trace points to a professional, well-orchestrated operation, a hallmark of organized crime hits. The individuals Hoffa was scheduled to meet at the Maciu's Red Fox restaurant, Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano and Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone, were both high-ranking Mafia members. Provenzano, in particular, had a well-documented and bitter feud with Hoffa. The theory posits that this meeting was a pretext, a lure to get Hoffa to a vulnerable location where he could be intercepted and eliminated. Over the years, various informants and former mob associates have offered accounts, some more credible than others, implicating specific individuals and methods. For example, the claims of Frank the Irishman Sheeran, a longtime Hoffa associate and alleged hitman, who confessed before his death to killing Hoffa on orders from Mafia boss Russell Bufalino, gained widespread attention, though many investigators and experts remain skeptical of his account's veracity. Despite the lack of a body or a definitive confession that could close the case, the confluence of motive preventing Hoffa's return to power and silencing his threats means the Mafia's proven capacity for such acts and opportunity luring him to a supposed meeting makes the Mafia assassination theory the most logical and persistent explanation for Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance. A central and compelling motive attributed to organized crime for the disappearance and presumed murder of Jimmy Hoffa was his determined effort to reclaim the presidency of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters following his release from prison. After his sentence was commuted by President Nixon in 1971, Hoffa was legally barred from participating in union activities until 1980. However, Hoffa, known for his tenacious and power-driven personality, immediately began working to overturn this restriction and to lay the groundwork for a comeback. This ambition directly threatened the new status quo that had been established within the Teamsters and its relationship with the Mafia. During Hoffa's imprisonment, his hand-picked successor, Frank Fitzsimmons, had taken over as Teamsters president, initially seen as a caretaker. Fitzsimmons proved to be far more accommodating to Mafia interests than Hoffa had been, particularly in granting easier access to the union's vast and lucrative pension funds, most notably the Central States Pension Fund. These funds were allegedly used by organized crime figures for high-risk loans and investments, especially in Las Vegas casino development, from which they could skim profits. The Mafia had become comfortable with Fitzsimmons' leadership, finding him more pliable and less inclined to challenge their influence or demand a significant cut of their illicit gains. Hoffa's planned return was perceived as a major threat to this lucrative arrangement. He was an old-school, powerful leader who, while having worked with the Mafia, was also known for his independent streak and a desire to maintain ultimate control. There were fears among Mafia leaders that a reinstated Hoffa would disrupt their access to Union funds, potentially demand a larger share of the spoils, or even, as some reports suggested, threaten to expose their deep-rooted infiltration of the Teamsters if they opposed his return. Hoffa was reportedly campaigning vigorously, meeting with local union leaders, and making it clear he intended to run for the presidency again, regardless of the ban or Mafia opposition. This created a direct conflict. Hoffa wanted his union back, while powerful organized crime elements, who had benefited significantly under Fitzsimmons, wanted him to remain sidelined. This clash of interests, centered on the control of one of America's most powerful unions and its multi-billion-dollar pension fund, is widely believed to have provided the primary motive for the Mafia to permanently silence Jimmy Hoffa. Jimmy Hoffa's determined push to regain control of the Teamsters Union in the mid-1970s posed a significant and direct threat to the substantial financial interests that organized crime had cultivated within the union, particularly through its access to and manipulation of the Teamsters' vast pension funds. The most notable of these was the Central States, Southeast and Southwest Areas Pension Fund, which, by that era, had become a multi-billion-dollar financial behemoth, often cynically referred to as the Mafia's bank. During Hoffa's imprisonment from 1967 to 1971, and under the more pliable leadership of his successor, Frank Fitzsimmons, Mafia families reportedly deepened their exploitation of these funds. The pension money was frequently channeled into high-risk loans and investments, often to finance the development of mob-controlled casinos in Las Vegas, as well as other ventures that benefited organized crime figures. These arrangements allowed for skimming of profits, kickbacks, and the laundering of illicit money. Fitzsimmons was widely seen as being far more accommodating to Mafia requests for such loans and investments than Hoffa had been, or was expected to be if he returned to power. While Hoffa himself had historical ties to the mob and had allowed certain interactions, he was also known for wanting ultimate control and a significant say in how union resources were managed. Hoffa's comeback campaign was therefore not just a leadership challenge. It was a direct threat to this lucrative financial pipeline. If Hoffa regained the presidency, it was anticipated that he would curtail unrestricted access. He would likely demand more oversight and control over how pension funds were loaned and invested, potentially cutting off or significantly reducing the flow of easy money to Mafia-backed projects, demand a larger share, or renegotiate terms. Known for his toughness, Hoffa might have sought to renegotiate the terms of the Mafia's involvement, demanding a larger personal cut or more benefits flowing directly to the union rather than to mobsters, potentially expose past dealings in his bid for power. Hoffa had reportedly threatened to expose the extent of Mafia infiltration and corruption within the Teamsters if he was opposed, which could have led to federal investigations and prosecutions that would dismantle their operations. The sheer scale of the financial interests at stake was enormous. Losing control over what amounted to a readily available source of vast, loosely regulated capital would have been a massive blow to various Mafia families across the country. This significant financial motive, the desire to protect their piggy bank, is considered a primary driver behind the Mafia's alleged decision to permanently eliminate Jimmy Hoffa, ensuring their continued exploitation of the Teamsters' wealth. Jimmy Hoffa's powerful reign as president of the Teamsters Union was significantly interrupted by serious legal troubles that led to multiple convictions and a period of imprisonment. These legal battles, primarily spearheaded by the Justice Department under Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, aimed to break Hoffa's alleged control over the union and sever its ties with organized crime. In 1964, Hoffa faced two major convictions. The first, in Chattanooga, Tennessee, was for jury tampering in a previous trial. The second, and more substantial conviction, came from a Chicago federal court for mail fraud and conspiracy related to the improper use and fraudulent loans from the Teamsters Central States Pension Fund. He was sentenced to a total of 13 years in federal prison for these offenses, 8 years for jury tampering and 5 years for fraud, to be served consecutively. Hoffa began serving this sentence in March 1967 at the Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary in Pennsylvania. Despite being incarcerated, he initially attempted to maintain control over the Teamsters through his loyal vice president, Frank Fitzsimmons, who was appointed acting president. However, as years passed, Fitzsimmons consolidated his own power, often in ways that were more accommodating to Mafia interests than Hoffa might have been. In a pivotal turn of events, on December 23, 1971, President Richard Nixon commuted Jimmy Hoffa's sentence to time served, making him eligible for immediate release. This commutation, however, came with a crucial and highly controversial condition. Hoffa was barred from engaging in the direct or indirect management of any labor organization until March 6, 1980. This effectively prohibited him from attempting to reclaim his presidency of the Teamsters or any other union leadership role for nearly 9 years. The reasons behind Nixon's commutation and the imposition of this specific condition have been subjects of much speculation, with theories ranging from a political deal for Teamsters support to an effort by those including organized crime figures who benefited from Hoffa's absence to keep him out of power. This restriction deeply frustrated Hoffa. He felt the condition was unjust and immediately began legal challenges to overturn it, while simultaneously, and more covertly, working behind the scenes to build support for an eventual comeback. His efforts to fight the ban and his clear intention to run for the Teamsters presidency again in defiance of powerful interests are widely seen as the primary catalysts that set him on a collision course with those who preferred him to remain on the sidelines, ultimately leading to his disappearance in 1975. One of the most compelling and frustrating aspects of the Jimmy Hoffa mystery is the complete absence of his physical remains, despite decades of intensive search efforts by the FBI and other law enforcement agencies. The search for Hoffa's body has become a grim, recurring drama, with numerous excavations and investigations launched across various states, all ultimately ending in failure and adding to the case's enigmatic status. Millions of dollars and countless investigative hours have been poured into these searches, fueled by a persistent desire for closure from Hoffa's family. The authorities aim to solve a high-profile crime, and an unending stream of tips, theories, and alleged deathbed confessions. Immediately after his disappearance in 1975, searches were concentrated in the Detroit area, including the Machu's Red Fox restaurant vicinity and properties linked to individuals suspected of involvement. For example, in September and October 1975, investigators searched a farm in Waterford Township and a trash compactor at another restaurant, the Raleigh House, both in Michigan, based on early leads. Over the subsequent years and decades, the search widened considerably, often prompted by new informant claims or speculative theories. Some of the more notable and publicized search locations have included various sites in Michigan, numerous properties, including farms, suburban homes, and even under a swimming pool, have been excavated. A significant search occurred in May 2006 at Hidden Dreams Farm in Milford, Michigan, where a barn was demolished, but no remains were found. Another dig took place in Oakland Township in 2013. New Jersey, given the involvement of New Jersey Mafia figures like Anthony Tony Provenzano, locations in this state have frequently been targeted. A prominent theory, pushed by journalist Dan Moldea and based on informant Frank Capola's claims, suggested Hoffa was buried in a steel drum at or near a former landfill, PJP landfill, also known as Brother Moscato's dump in Jersey City, beneath the Pulaski Skyway. The FBI conducted site surveys and analysis there as recently as 2021 and 2022, but announced no significant findings. Giant Stadium, East Rutherford, New Jersey. One of the most enduring urban legends was that Hoffa was buried in the concrete foundation of the old Giant Stadium, then under construction. While this theory captured public imagination, it was largely dismissed by investigators and never led to a formal excavation by the FBI before the stadium's demolition in 2010. Each new search, often accompanied by intense media coverage, has briefly raised hopes of solving the mystery, only to end in disappointment. The consistent failure to locate Hoffa's body has allowed the most macabre and imaginative theories about his disposal to flourish, from being incinerated or put through a car compactor to being shipped overseas or disposed of in a swamp. This enduring lack of physical evidence remains a critical barrier to definitively closing one of America's most captivating unsolved cases. Throughout the decades-long investigation into Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance, a multitude of individuals, primarily from the ranks of organized crime, have been considered suspects. However, despite the FBI's extensive efforts and the emergence of various theories and informant testimonies, no one has ever been formally charged or convicted directly for Hoffa's abduction and presumed murder due to a persistent lack of definitive, prosecutable evidence. Among the most prominent and consistently named suspects were the two men Hoffa was allegedly scheduled to meet on the day he vanished. Anthony "Tony Provenzano, a powerful capo in the Genovese crime family and a Teamsters official from New Jersey. Provenzano had a well-documented feud with Hoffa, stemming from their time together in prison. His opposition to Hoffa's return to Teamsters leadership and his notorious reputation for violence made him a prime suspect. Anthony "Tony Jack" Giacalone, a respected and feared senior figure in the Detroit Mafia. Giacalone was believed to be a mediator in the Hoffa-Provenzano dispute, but many suspect he played a more central role in luring Hoffa to the fatal meeting. Other key figures frequently cited in connection with the disappearance include Salvatore "Sallybugs" Briguglio, a close associate and alleged hitman for Provenzano. Briguglio was considered by many investigators to be a strong candidate for being one of the actual triggermen. He was murdered in 1978, silencing a potentially crucial witness or participant, Russell Bufalino, the powerful boss of the Bufalino crime family in northeastern Pennsylvania. Some theories suggest Bufalino may have authorized or ordered the hit on Hoffa due to Hoffa's destabilizing influence and threats against Mafia interests. Frank, the Irishman, Sheeran, a Hoffa associate and alleged hitman linked to the Bufalino family. In his later years, Sheeran confessed to killing Hoffa, a claim detailed in the book I Heard You Paint Houses, which formed the basis for the film The Irishman. However, Sheeran's confession is highly debated, and many investigators and experts doubt its veracity due to inconsistencies and lack of corroborating evidence. Charles "Chucky" O'Brien, Hoffa's foster son and longtime associate. O'Brien was suspected early on, partly because a car he had borrowed from Giacalone's son was believed to have been involved in transporting Hoffa. However, O'Brien consistently denied involvement, and the evidence against him was largely circumstantial. The primary obstacle to prosecution has always been the Mafia's code of silence, or omerta. Individuals with direct knowledge were unlikely to talk, and those who did often provided information that was difficult to verify or use in court. While the investigation led to some convictions on lesser charges like obstruction of justice or charges unrelated to Hoffa for some suspects, the central crime of Hoffa's murder remained unsolved. The absence of Hoffa's body further complicated matters, removing a critical piece of forensic evidence. This case starkly illustrates the immense difficulty in prosecuting organized crime figures for their ultimate crimes without irrefutable physical proof or multiple credible, cooperating witnesses from within their insulated ranks. 7 years after his inexplicable vanishing from the Machu's Red Fox restaurant parking lot, James Riddle, Jimmy Hoffa, was officially declared legally dead. The declaration was made by an Oakland County, Michigan probate court on December 8, 1982, although the presumptive date of death was often cited as July 30, 1982, marking the 7-year anniversary of his disappearance. This legal pronouncement, while a significant milestone in the long and tortuous saga, did not signify the end of the mystery, but rather provided a measure of legal and personal closure for his family and estate. Under most legal jurisdictions in the United States, a person who has been missing for a continuous period, typically 7 years, without any evidence that they are still alive, can be presumed dead. This legal presumption allows for the settlement of the missing person's affairs, such as the distribution of their estate, the payment of life insurance benefits, and the ability for surviving spouses to remarry. For the Hoffa family, particularly his wife Josephine and children James P. Hoffa and Barbara Ann Kranzer, this declaration allowed them to move forward with these practical and emotional necessities, acknowledging, in a legal sense, what was widely believed to be true, that Jimmy Hoffa was no longer alive and was almost certainly the victim of a homicide. The legal declaration of death did not, however, halt the ongoing FBI investigation into his disappearance. A missing person case, especially one involving suspected foul play of such a high-profile nature, remains open as a homicide investigation even after a legal death declaration, until it is definitively solved or officially closed due to lack of further viable leads. The Hoffa's investigation continued for many years after 1982, with agents pursuing new tips and conducting searches as information arose. While the court order provided a degree of finality for estate and insurance purposes, it did little to satisfy the public's desire for answers or the family's longing for the truth about Hoffa's ultimate fate and the location of his remains. It was a legal acknowledgement of an overwhelming probability rather than a discovery of concrete fact. The declaration underscored the grim reality that, despite years of intensive investigation, no trace of Hoffa had been found, nor had any individual been successfully prosecuted for his presumed murder. Thus, while Jimmy Hoffa was legally dead, the mystery of how, why, and by whom he was killed, and where his body was disposed of, remained very much alive in the American consciousness. The disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa has bequeathed a complex and enduring legacy, cementing its status as one of America's most iconic and talked-about cold cases. Nearly half a century after he vanished, the question, "Where is Jimmy Hoffa?" remains a popular culture shorthand for an unsolved mystery, a testament to the case's deep penetration into the national psyche. Its unresolved nature, combined with Hoffa's larger-than-life persona and his entanglement with the Mafia, has ensured its perpetual fascination. The Hoffa saga has become a rich vein for popular culture, inspiring numerous books, investigative articles, documentaries, television series, and feature films, most notably Martin Scorsese's The Irishman 2019, which was based on Charles Brandt's book I Heard You Paint Houses, detailing Frank Sheeran's disputed confession. These works, while often blending fact with speculation and dramatic license, have kept the case alive for new generations, continually re-examining the theories, the characters, and the era in which it occurred. The sheer number of theories about his demise and the purported locations of his remains, from Giants Stadium to car crushers to undisclosed burial sites, has also fueled countless urban legends. Beyond its status as a captivating mystery, the Hoffa case serves as a potent symbol and a stark historical marker of the peak of organized crime's influence within the American labor movement. It vividly illustrates the dangerous and often corrupt symbiosis that existed between powerful unions like the Teamsters and various Mafia families, who saw union coffers and influence as lucrative avenues for exploitation and power. Hoffa's own career and his ultimate fate are inextricably linked to this dark chapter in American labor history. The case continues to raise profound questions about power, corruption, loyalty, betrayal, and the elusive nature of justice when confronted with sophisticated criminal enterprises. The enduring public fascination is not just about solving a puzzle. It's also about understanding a particular period of American history where figures like Hoffa could command immense power while navigating treacherous underworld connections. His disappearance marked, in many ways, the beginning of the end for that overt level of Mafia control over major unions, as subsequent federal efforts like the RICO Act began to dismantle organized crime structures. Yet, the mystery of Jimmy Hoffa himself, what truly happened, who was definitively responsible, and where his body lies, remains a compelling, unanswered question, ensuring his story will continue to be told and debated for years to come. The fate of Jimmy Hoffa remains one of the great American enigmas, a testament to a time when organized crime wielded immense power, capable of making even a figure as formidable as Hoffa disappear without a trace. despite decades of FBI investigations, countless theories, and numerous searches for his remains. The truth of what happened on that July afternoon in 1975, and where Jimmy Hoffa ultimately ended up, is likely locked away by the silence of those who took him. His disappearance marked a turning point, a brutal end to a storied and controversial career, and it continues to serve as a stark reminder of the dangerous intersections of union power, politics, and the Mafia. The question of "where is Jimmy Hoffa" still echoes, a chilling piece of American folklore. Thank you for joining me, David, on Crime Line as we've explored this captivating and unsolved case.